Welcome to the Film Analysis. Today, it's not about a movie, it's about the diversity inclusion guidelines of Amazon Studios, and I promise you, they consist of total nonsense. But I think it's important to talk about it, even if these guidelines are already a few months old, as they are part of an ongoing discussion. It's also important because Amazon has such tremendous market power, and it's likely that this will shape the film world and change it. Probably many studios will follow suit. Art is being attacked, it is being narrowed down, suffocated even. The acting profession is being trampled underfoot. The set of rules testifies to a false and very mendacious identity policy, which in no way creates more diversity, but actually the opposite. It is an attack on the imagination, on fiction, on what we love, namely films. If we look at these guidelines, we also must talk about the essence of the acting profession, but more on that in a moment. First and foremost, this set of rules was published as Inclusion Policy Playbook. It's not just about in-house production. This policy has also come into effect in 2021 in the United States for first look, and overall contracts as well as for those working on their own productions, Amazon Originals. The document opposes stereotyping, even though you must always ask whether it's good or bad stereotyping. Where does stereotyping become over-affirmative, rendering the dissolution of the stereotype? But of course, such masses don't know a set of rules, and that's a particularly difficult thing about it. It's very difficult to pin art with all its ambivalences and plurality down to rules. Whenever there are any attempts at manifestos that filmmakers must adhere to, we see that where the boundaries are crossed, where the rules are broken, art emerges. It's about promoting minority representation, creating more representation, but it's also about increasing scrutiny of those representations, as it says in the letter. Furthermore, Amazon Studios provides each company with a reporting template to indicate whether expectations have been met. This report must be submitted within 1 month of the completion of principal photography and will include the following: data on gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation and disability for production-specific superior talent. This includes directors and actors, but also department heads. Then a full description of the film and episodic content, as well as the percentage and number of characters who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender, including non-binary and those with a disability. It's not at all, as has sometimes been claimed on Twitter, for example, simply a recommendation, but represents a serious policy, apparently reducing the invisibility in the entertainment industry, where the story allows it to. For example, a film about Nazis will not be so diverse. The guidelines state we aim to include one character from each of the following categories for speaking roles of any size, with at least 50% of the total number of these characters being women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, atypical, non-binary, secondly, persons with disabilities, thirdly, regionally underrepresented ethnic cultural groups. Exemplified For the USA, the document mentions Black people, Latin Americans, indigenous people, Middle Easterners, North African descendants, Asians, Pacific Islanders or mixed race people. A single figure can embody several of these identities, which means that we are witnessing a completely bureaucratic system being set up to evaluate art or to prevent art. The language astonishes me. It is sometimes reminiscent of Neo-speak. Take the following example. This work is not easy to do, but don't worry, we are in this together. Yes, thanks Amazon for embracing plurality and celebrating diverse films. Well, it even reminds us of the Haze Code, which regulated what could be shown and how it could be shown until the 40s in Hollywood, how sexuality was depicted, criminality and so on. It was a very repressive set of rules, but it was binding, written in a language of prohibition, allowing clever directors to undermine this Haze Code, to be rebels in a certain way. There is one parallel, however, namely when we look at the chapter on religions. There it says in the Haze Code, no film or episode in a film should be allowed to throw ridicule on any religious faith honestly maintained. Ministers of religion in their characters or ministers should not be used in comedy as villains or as unpleasant persons. Ceremonies of any definite religion should be supervised by someone thoroughly conversant with that religion. What does the Amazon Code say? Use care not to trivialize, mock or minimize the importance of different religious traditions, rituals or texts. Consult experts to determine where caution should be used or nuance explored. For example, spiritual songs or illustrations may be considered sacred to members of certain religious groups. Juxtaposing these images or music against content that deviates from faith traditions may be offensive. Goodbye, Monty Python, you have no future. Amazon also warns, if one addresses the topic of fundamentalism, one is to ask oneself first whether too much reporting about Islamic fundamentalism exists. One must also incorporate positive depictions of Islam. The same stands for other religions. Now I ask myself, if you create a film about the latest scandals in the Catholic Church, do you still have to emphasize the glory of Catholicism, or can you concentrate on one aspect? The idea that someone somewhere could always feel hurt, yes, that's art, and that's also the modern world. That's civilization, art granting us this freedom that we can trigger some people, maybe even we ourselves are triggered from time to time, that we turn away in disgust for some reason or another, but that's why you can't restrict art in any way, censor it. Where consensus ceases to exist, freedom of art begins. If it weren't so sad, one would have to laugh at the ever more detailed description of how roles are to be cast. For example, the playbook says, Korean, Japanese or Chinese individuals are not interchangeable, they are culturally distinct and all fit within the Asian racial ethnic category. For instance, holiday celebrations across these groups differ in terms of tradition and date. The same is true for individuals of Latino descent or heritage. Puerto Ricans, Mexicans and Brazilians may all be considered Latino, but there are important cultural differences between these groups. They should not be considered interchangeable when casting. End of quote. Of course, there are some cultural differences, but should we really cast in this way of thinking? How are we supposed to look at films in the future? We are experiencing identity politics resembling the new right, ethnopluralism, where people insist very strongly on cultural differences, and some people are like this, others are like that, and it's not possible for one person to live elsewhere anyway, even though they are different, and so everything has been nicely separated from one another. With the Amazon guidelines, we witness ethnopluralism hiding in a capitalistic code. The guidelines pose suggestive questions. Do you cast a person of Indian origin for a figure that is Pakistani? Further, it is said, if the figure, however, has a clear ethnic background, you should make sure that the ethnic background of the actor is not in contradiction to this representation. So even a right-winger like Narendra Modi will be happy when he reads this. Following up, the guidelines deal with professional stereotypes, and one may think maybe now the class issue comes up, as I somewhat remember inequality concerning us, but no, you are simply supposed to avoid stereotypes there as well. It doesn't always have to be a cab driver with Arab origin, that's it. If you have a gay figure, you should consider whether you represent him in a job that has to do with appearance, for example with fashion. Amazon uses the term feminized professions. I thought we were already a bit further, no longer dividing professions into male and female. Amazon declares the craftsman or the construction worker to be male, but the hairdresser or the fashion designer is to be a feminized profession. On the one hand, clichés are to be fought, and one only creates new ones or rolls out old ones that have already been overcome. Of no concern is the exploitation of workers, and certainly not of Amazon workers. The class question is of no interest at all. Instead, we learn that the sexualization of characters in cinema sometimes has negative effects on the viewers. Yes, that may be true. But sometimes this very sexualization contains quite the empowering energy. In his book, White, Bret Easton Ellis describes the importance for him as a young gay man to also see a sexualized male star in the cinema. He's referring to Richard Gere. His display proved quite inspiring to him. The Amazon playbook also deals with issues that have no relevance whatsoever nowadays. Role clichés are mentioned again. One may argue they did exist in the cinema of the 80s and 90s, but no longer in today's cinema. Twitter liberals always come up with some examples from film history, such as blackfacing or scenes of Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, where he plays the caricature of a Japanese person. However, the film dates from 1961. At that time, homosexuality was still punishable in most countries. We have moved on over the last 60 years. Rooney's display wouldn't be possible today, fortunately. But You don't have to pretend that it all just happened yesterday. There's also a chapter on humor that at least doesn't explain how and when to laugh, but if you are a scriptwriter, you should ask yourself if you are the right person to tell the story. I would say, in general, you should always ask yourself if you are the right person when you write something down. But the question might be talent, not representation. Amazon encourages further to discuss the script and the story with members of the communities you represent. To ensure authenticity, you should avoid hurtful humor. Well, research when describing a foreign milieu is one thing, but if a contact person from the depicted community becomes a necessity, absurdity begins to unfold. If my art displays the Catholic Church, am I required to speak with the bishop, with the Pope, with someone who is simply baptized, or with a practicing Catholic? So many questions remain unanswered, simply as they are not to be answered. After all, it represents a document full of truisms. Yes, of course, if you deal with foreign material, it is very important that you research thoroughly. Thanks for the advice, Amazon. Now we approach the peak. One reads, Amazon Studios is committed to authentic portrayals. It is our intention whenever possible to cast actors in a role whose identity aligns with the identity of the character they will be playing by gender, gender identity, nationality, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and disability. Amazon is apparently now forcing actors to come out if they want to play a gay character. Everyone now has to say that sexuality they are so private about. That's the encroaching employer, which is what we have banned. That's exactly what we don't want, the employer interfering in my private life, knowing who I love, who I go to bed with, and so on. But here it's suddenly presented as a very virtuous institution, human resource management of the most perfidious kind. But this is where we must dwell for a while. Authenticity, identity and identification. These terms not only characterize the Amazon guidelines, but also many discussions about films. That's why it's important that we talk about Amazon's demands. In principle, one witnesses the abolition of the actor. The actor equals his played character. By this logic, Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain is no longer conceivable because we know that the two main actors are or were heterosexual. Similar cases prove to be problematic if we follow Amazon. Or take a lesbian actress playing a heterosexual character, or a man playing a trans person, as in Xavier Dolan's Lawrence Anyways, a great piece of art truly contributing a lot to the understanding of the trans community. But Amazon refuses this art. Interestingly enough, in Germany we had actors coming out during the Act Out campaign, in which actors came out as part of the LGBT community. Many of these actors demanded to play every role, not being committed to cliché, say gay or lesbian roles. Amazon brings the actor's nationality up once more. We have arrived in the modern age. I thought because nationality simply means citizenship. Whoever has a German passport is German, and that doesn't have anything to do with appearance. We are dealing here with quite the delicate identity discourse. The German philosopher Theodor W. Adorno always opposed this very identity thinking, and he also saw art as a means against this identity thinking. He said it's about creating an aesthetic identity. Aesthetic identity should support the non-identical, the identity compulsion suppresses. This compulsion to define ourselves, we have to be that, because one is never only Jewish, lesbian, white, and that's why the actor is such an important figure for a modern society and also clarifies for us what actually constitutes a human being, namely to distance oneself from oneself. There is this famous text from the 18th century by Diderot, The Paradox of the Actor, about appearance and being. The paradox consists of the actor's effect being particularly great when he plays a character that has nothing to do with him. Quote, the authenticity comes from a character when the actor is not authentic, Diderot claims. But he may exercise techniques to do it well, and as he himself is not affected now, he can move the audience. Theater and the movies represent transformational places, although that's even more true for theater. In theater, I could appear with my suit and say, I am Lady Macbeth, and there's an agreement with the audience that the audience believes that. In the same way, the theater stage can be completely empty. One could suggest we are here in Versailles and the audience believes it. That's not quite how it works in the movies. It's closer to realism and closer to typecasting. But of course, it's not about just doing something documentary now. And we will also notice again and again when we look at film history that you can't fix identity like that. What about an actor like Omar Sharif, who is Egyptian, but whose parents are of Syrian Lebanese descent, and who plays the Russian Dr. Zhivago? You can't say, oh God, that's terrible cultural appropriation. The star system has produced racism in the past. Of course, the star system means you have only few people, cast them everywhere, then of course you sometimes painted them dark to play roles they shouldn't have played. So much was expected of the stars because they could fill the cinema. The star system no longer exists in this way. It has become very differentiated. Today we have a lot of successful films and series that don't even need stars in that sense anymore. So we have a much greater variety. Of course, there's no reason to do blackfacing, especially since there is a very clear racist tradition in blackfacing, which should therefore no longer be taken up. But it becomes questionable at some point when you say that we always want to specify the nationality. So, of course, it couldn't be a problem if an Omar Sharif played a Russian. That shouldn't be a case today either. But what about this authentic portrayal that is demanded with the identification? Let's take an acting teacher who is quite decisive for Hollywood, namely Stanislavski. He also deals with the question how an actor can play anything, as theoretically he is only one person. He says that the art and the psychotechnique of the actor must aim at taking up the seeds of the innate human qualities and vices in a natural way, and then to raise and develop them for this or that role. Meaning, we naturally have a wealth of emotions that are not as strongly developed as, for example, in Shakespeare's Hamlet. But we can, if we want to play the role now, refer to our very own emotions, bring them to life and fill a role with them. The point is that you can always recombine these emotions. Stanislavski compares this to notes. There are only a few notes, but you can play completely different melodies. Emotional memory is also important, he says. Stanislavski says that the actor can portray something as authentically as possible by falling back on an emotion that he has experienced. But this emotion does not have to be the same for this situation. There is no real parallel there. Nevertheless, an actor, for example, can transfer the pain of separation that he felt when he got divorced, use these emotions when he plays a role where he has to say goodbye to his child who died at an early age. One does not resemble the other, but these emotions may prove useful. Stanislavski adds at one point, we need an infinitely wide horizon since we play modern plays of all nations, since we are called to reproduce the life of the human spirit of all the people of the globe. And he really says that again in a very beautiful passage. The actor takes from real or imagined life everything it can give to man. End of quote. That's what actors do. They can take that out of themselves, they can experience it through observation, and this can also develop very strongly that one then awakens great emotions in oneself and then acts them out on the screen. This leads to radical methods such as method acting, which was also further developed by Lee Strasberg, who refers to Stanislavski. But it doesn't even have to go that far. You can, of course, understand the profession of the actor in a different way. What is important, however, is that one recognizes that acting is about transforming oneself. From Romy Schneider, we have the sad and beautiful quote, "In the movies, I can do everything, but in life, nothing." Michael Caine looks primarily at craft, who rather says you need emotions and you need to be able to call them up, but it's primarily a matter of craft. I can recommend his book, Acting in Film, An Actor's Take on Movie Making, to anyone who wants to become an actor, but also really to anyone who is interested in movies. He gives very practical tips. If you play in a historical costume, you should wear it earlier, far before playing, so that you move naturally in it. Be careful when shaving. You must not cut yourself because you have a close-up. Caine also stresses the importance of achieving emotional continuity. You have an outside shot, a long shot, there's a furious farewell scene, and then there is a close-up which is shot 3 days later in the studio. You must be able to recreate this farewell emotion. That has less to do with identification. When Caine had to play a German as a Brit, it was like this. He writes, "So I played a German in The Last Valley. I thought that the obvious trap was to play a German like a man trying to do a German accent. So I decided to play my character like a German trying to speak perfect English. I hired dialect records and listened to them non-stop for a few days. Then I put it out of my mind and tried to speak good English, but with a German's basic speech pattern. I think it worked out pretty well." End of quote. Further, one may apply Kane to the Amazon guidelines. How do you create a character that you are not yourself? Some have said he's like Alfie, the tragic womanizer. Ken says, no, I didn't really have anything to do with Alfie. He says, as an actor, you must try to put together a character from what you might know, what you have already observed. Once Kane had to play a university professor who was also an alcoholic, but he didn't know any alcoholic university professor, and he himself never saw a university from the inside. But he knew an old teacher who inspired him, and Kane had another friend who was an alcoholic, and Kane took something from him as well, and so he merged these existing people and created the role. He says, if you want to portray a character convincingly, you must steal. He writes, when becoming a character, you have to steal. Steal whatever you see. You can even steal from other actors' characterizations. But if you do so, only steal from the best. If you see Vivien Leigh do something, or Marlon Brando, or Robert De Niro, or Meryl Streep do something that fits your character, steal it. Because what you are seeing them do, they stole. End of quote. It's very nice that he makes it clear again that this idea of authenticity in film doesn't work. A gay character can only be authentically portrayed by a gay actor. That's wrong. Maybe the opposite is true. Kane brings up a nice anecdote here. It's a strange situation, but in film a person is a person, not an actor, and yet you need an actor to play the person. About 20 years ago, when I was doing the Ipcress file, I heard the director, Sid Fury, said, "I need a butcher in this part." Someone suggested that he get a real butcher who knew how to cut up meat authentically. Fury answered, "If I have got a good actor, I have got a real butcher. If I've got a real butcher, the minute I put him in front of the camera, he's stiff and I've got a bad actor." That's the bottom line. Acting is about transformation after all. It represents an art to transform into another character, to step out of yourself. But Amazon Studios is torpedoing acting and ultimately human diversity under the guise of diversity. People are forced into sexual confessions, but the film does not become more diverse through such roles. It already becomes more diverse without them, as we observe everywhere. Why? Because the audience is also more diverse because of global film markets that cannot be served with all white casts. But whoever presses art into rules suppresses it. Acting is a lie, but if it is good, a very truthful one. A game with appearances that frees us from our essentialist being and thinking. The pigeonhole thinking is now declared the rule by Amazon, resulting in a disaster for the actors and the spectators. We apply only identity and authenticity filters, and that's why we only watch but don't see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.